Now, for more on what Africa's economies hope to achieve at the G20 summit, I'm joined by Paolo Mauro. He's a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, this year, South Africa has a seat at the G20 table at a time when it's facing its own economic challenges. What do you think needs to be done to help unlock the country's potential?
Well, let me speak about sub-Saharan Africa generally. I think that we've seen a decade of very strong growth in sub-Saharan Africa, about 5%. Now we are at a moment where some of the commodity producers are either in recession or growing much more slowly. On average, in sub-Saharan Africa, we're seeing a growth rate of about 3%. What needs to be done? I think some action can be taken at home. I think relevant to the G20, some action can also be taken by the international community, for example, to foster investment in infrastructure, to facilitate flows of foreign direct investment toward sub-Saharan Africa, which I believe is becoming a much more attractive business destination for companies around the globe.
And do you think that with having South Africa represented at the G20, do you think that investment could then perhaps broaden out to Africa at large? Do you think this would really put them in the spotlight?
I think that may be part of what is going to happen, but in general, we know that the perception of sub-Saharan Africa has changed dramatically over the past years. We used to think of it as a destination for aid, but now it's really seen as a business opportunity, and there are good reasons for that. One is the track record of strong growth. I'm hoping that strong growth returns. Maybe now we are just in a temporary slowdown because of the commodity prices, but hopefully the long term is for a return to growth. And for the future, we know that a lot of population growth is going to occur in sub-Saharan Africa. Right now, there are 900 million people there, and we are projecting that 20 years from now, there will be 1.6 billion. That's a huge increase. It means a lot of opportunities for companies to find workers, but also consumers. And that is going to really change the way that the sub-Saharan region interacts with the rest of the world. I think creating opportunities for investment to go there is the way in which that continent can be supported.
And as you mentioned, this growth of consumers and workers, Africa is also the youngest continent by age in terms of its population. So do you think that's another reason that perhaps developed economies are now paying more attention to less developed economies in Africa?
Well, if you look at the developments in working age population, sub-Saharan Africa is essentially the only region where in the next 40 or 50 years we're going to see a net increase. There's some increase in working age population in India, but pretty much elsewhere, populations are going to be stagnant or there's going to be aging. So the energy, the opportunities, perhaps some of the entrepreneurial ideas are going to come from Africa, and that's what's going to make it attractive. The other thing that is going on is that as individuals become richer, they change the way in which they spend. So they will typically reduce the share of their spending on food and spend much more on transportation. And that's part of what we will see in sub-Saharan Africa and other emerging markets. I'm just completing a book called World on the Move, in which we project that spending on transportation will quadruple in sub-Saharan Africa, India, China over the next 20 years. So that creates the need for a lot of infrastructure investment. Right. And the G20 can help to direct that investment in a good direction.
And Paolo, in terms of some of the countries that could be receiving the bulk of some of this investment, who could be the possible standouts?
Well, I think that, of course, it depends a little bit on the current macroeconomic situation. So some of the interest is driven by the ups and downs of the particular couple of years. But in general terms, the countries that can attract investment are those that are perceived as being less corrupt, more transparent, right. Where the taxation is much more stable. So a general perception of a stable environment is something that certainly helps attract business.
Now, Paolo, you mentioned India and also China and obviously South Africa, all part of the BRICS nations, including Brazil and Russia. Now, collectively, they were a force to be reckoned with in 2008. How can they work together to really regain that footing again?
Well, I think the G20 is perhaps one of the areas where international coordination can take place, not only among the BRICS, but more generally. I'm really hoping that we will see some concrete initiatives coming out of that summit, hopefully in the area of making infrastructure investment easier, more prominent. And when it comes to international financial institutions, we've seen the rise of the AIIB, for example. I think those can play a very helpful role as long as the contracts, the projects that they support are according to international good practice. But clearly, that's an area where we may be able to see some good progress.
Well, hopefully we'll find out in a few days. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to leave it there. Paolo Mauro from the Peterson Institute.